All right. Good morning, everyone. How are we today? Hopefully, everyone can see and hear me. Very good. Well, we're well into the 12th week, although we still have to finish off some things from week 11. So we need to finish off uh our look at the nature of the mind, and then we'll move on to personal identity and self. Here is about where we were. We were just talking about kinds of non-reductive physicalism. Um, so let's recap reductive physicalism just a little bit so that we don't take up too much time. Uh, Reductive physicalism, as described by Crumley, includes things like type identity theory. Type identity theory, you'll recall, excuse me, I need to get a tissue. Ugh. So type identity theory um, says that each type of mental state is identical to a type of brain state. And so if I, for example, I don't know, think of, or not think of, let's say if I perceive the Norway maple that's in my front yard, uh, I have the same type of brain state um, as you do when you perceive it. So when you have the idea or the percept of this lovely tree, you have the exact same type of brain state that I have when I'm having a perception of the tree. Um, this was one of the early, I guess, an early version of identity theory. It was developed in the 1950s. Um, it didn't really survive all that long because uh, it limited mental states to human beings, and within human beings, it also sort of puts a limit on what um, sort of what mental states are like. It rules out, or seems to rule out, the possibility of non-human animals having mental states, because non-human animals would have to have the same type of brain states that humans have in order to have the same type of mental states that humans have. But of course, non-human animals have somewhat different brains than we have. So they obviously cannot have the exact same types of brain states that humans have. So I don't know. There's a cat that lives in the bookstore down the street from me, a big old black and white cat. If it perceives the tree, um, well, how could it do so on type identity theory if it's got a brain that's different in terms of its structure from you or I? It doesn't have the right kind of brain on type identity theory to have mental states. But clearly, we want to countenance the idea that non-human animals have mental states. Likewise, there might be, I don't know, some kind of extraterrestrial life somewhere out there in the universe that has radically different physiology. Maybe they're not even carbon-based life forms. They're based on, I don't know, some other kind of chemistry. So they don't even have brains, but they have mental states. They have pains, pleasures, beliefs, desires, etc. So type identity theory isn't going to work there because They can't have the same types of brain states that we do. Maybe they don't even have brains. Maybe they have something else. They've evolved some other means of thinking, right? Or really sophisticated AI. We have no problem thinking of really sophisticated, like really advanced, like artificial general intelligence level stuff from science fiction, say, having mental states. But artificial intelligence isn't implemented within a brain, it's implemented within a computer. So type identity theory suffers from this multiple realizability objection. And that is, of course, that um, mental states can be realized by different brain states and maybe different kinds of physical stuff too. So a lot of physicalists nowadays are functionalists, not type identity theorists. So functionalism says that how we understand minds and mental states, or where we should understand minds and mental states in terms of the functional roles of the mental states, relations between inputs, outputs, information processing steps in the middle. Functionalism kind of likens the mind to a computer, and there's a reason for that. It's because functionalism was developed as a response to identity theory by a philosopher named Hilary Putnam, who used Alan Turing's notion of a Turing machine, an early sort of imaginary theoretical computer, um, in order to explain more about the mind in general. So one thing that's important to take away is that on functionalism, um, minds are multiply realizable. They're what we call multiply realizable. So you can have a mind in a human brain. You can have a non-human animal brain realizing a mind. Aliens with radically different physiology can have minds. Perhaps computers can have minds, right? There's no problem if you're a functionalist talking about computers having mental states. No problem at all. So, in terms of some examples of multiple realizability, well, I think we've already gone through a number of them. I think last time one example that I mentioned was that of a calculator, right? If you want to understand the notion of multiple realizability, just think of a pocket calculator, which probably you don't use very often nowadays. But a pocket calculator is a circuit board with everything sort of hardwired into it, and you can push the buttons, and 2 plus 2 equals 4. Boom, it does it. That's one way you can have a calculator. But as I mentioned, you can also have a virtual calculator on your smartphone or your computer, calculator made out of software. Or you could have something like an abacus, right? Where you're sliding beads along little wires and calculating that way. All of them are calculators. All of them take some numbers as input and apply certain operations to them, like addition or subtraction, and then output another number. That is what makes them a calculator, not what they're made of. But what do we mean when we say that mental states are defined in terms of functional roles? A functionalist means something like this. Usually they go with the example of pain as a mental state. Because identity theorists, type identity theorists, remember they identify mental states with physical states, mental states with brain states, or states of the nervous system more broadly. So if you're a type identity theorist, to be in pain might just be to have certain nerves firing, certain neurons. In this case, your C fibers. So C fibers are a type of nerve tissue that we have in our nervous systems, and it fires when we are experiencing pain. So to be in pain is simply to have your C fibers firing, and that's what it is to be in pain. Physical pain. So I stub my toe, my C fibers fire, I experience the pain, I go, ouch, and that's just what it is to be in pain. But you see the problem, right? I mean, maybe there are creatures like, I don't know, aliens from the planet Zorp, and they don't have C fibers, right? They have Z fibers or something, right? Whatever their alien equivalent of C fibers is. Can we say that they are not in pain? Well, a functionalist has no problem um, has no problem here because the functionalist doesn't identify pain with C fibers firing. Sure, in humans, C fibers firing plays a functional role. So I stub my toe, my C fibers fire, I feel pain, I grab my toe and go, ouch. So I have the right input output relations. I'm in pain. But these aliens from the planet Zorp, if they, I don't know, stub their tentacles or whatever they have, and go ouch in their alien language, and their Z fibers are firing, well, they're still in pain too. That's the functional equivalent of human pain in these aliens. So that's what we mean when we say we define mental states in terms of functional roles. And functionalism is non reductive because we don't reduce things to a single type. We don't identify mental states with a single type of brain state. So that's functionalism. Any questions about functionalism? We will talk a little bit more about it, but I just want to make sure that everybody's sort of clear about what we mean by functional roles, understanding mental states in terms of functional roles. Okay. Something that's often talked about as if it's completely distinct from functionalism, but which a functionalism may well adopt, or a functionalist may well adopt, is an alternative to type identity theory called token identity theory. And on token identity theory, we don't identify um, types of mental states with types of brain states. We identify tokens of types of brain states with tokens of types of mental states. So let's make sure we're clear on what we're talking about here. What is a type and what is a token? Well, a type is like a kind of thing. So um, if I'm a type identity theorist and I believe that when I'm in pain, I have the same type of brain state that you have, the exact same brain state. A token identity theorist says that, well, we each have our own kind of instance or version of that type of brain state. So you can think of it this way, right? Like, I'll just looking outside, there is a Toyota parked down the street. I don't know what kind. Let's say it's a Toyota Corolla, right? So a Toyota Corolla is a type of car. Now, a, the type identity theorist version of this would say that if one of us has a Toyota Corolla and another has a Toyota Corolla, we have the exact same Toyota Corolla. But really, that Toyota parked down the street is a token of that make and model of car. And maybe the other one parked over there or wherever it is, that is a different token of the same type of car. So there are different particular instances of the same kind of thing. So on token identity theory, if I have a mental state like I'm in pain and my C fibers firing, I have a different token of that type of mental state than the one that you would have if you were in pain. Why? Well, because we each have different brains. Our brains are all wired up a little bit differently. If you looked at our brains under some kind of very detailed brain scanner when we were experiencing pain, we might see slightly different firing patterns, right? Our C fibers will be firing, sure, but maybe they'll be firing in different ways, slightly different ways from one another. So there are many different brain states that might realize this type of mental state, being in pain. So what we do on token identity theory is we identify a particular mental state with a token of a type of mental state and not with a type of mental state itself. Okay. Are there any questions about token identity theory? Yes. Okay, go ahead. Any questions? Give me your questions and I will answer them. I mean, it can seem like a little bit opaque because it's like, this token of a type of brain state is identical with this token of a type of this mental state. Da, 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 da. It can seem like we're juggling a lot of terms here. Um, but really, it's quite straightforward, right? We can't, uh, well, a token is a particular example of a kind of thing. So, give me an example of a kind of thing. Anything. Could be anything at all. Uh, Yeah, okay, like the color blue, like April says, or humans. Well, humans are a kind of mammal, sure, but let's go through these all one at a time. Well, a Civic Type R is not the same as a base model Civic. Yeah, but they're both Honda Civics, right? So if our type is Honda Civic, then your Civic Type R is a token of that type. My, I don't know, my neighbor's old Honda Civic from the 90s is another token of that type. Um, the Honda Civic at the junkyard that's being stripped for parts is another token of that type, right? Or, like Karen says, humans are a kind of mammal. That's close. Rather, think of human as the type. So human is the type of thing. Each of us are tokens of that type because we're all humans. But I'm one human and you're another human and we're all humans, but we're all different. We're not all identical. We're all the same kind of creature, but we are all individual members of the species. So we are all tokens of the type of thing that we call human. Or like April says, the color blue. If we want to think of it in terms of universals, then the type would be the universal and the token would be the particular. So one instance of blue, like a car's paint is blue, is one token of the same type of blue that perhaps appears on an electric guitar that someone has or something, right? Yeah, a rose is a type of flower, and all the individual roses in a bunch of roses, like you buy a dozen roses, they're all the same type of flower, and each rose is a token of that type. Yeah, tokens are within types. Yeah, or like Chloe says, we have we all have the same philosophy textbook, right? Uh, so that's the type. And then um, each each book that each of us has is a token of that type. In this way, so Kai is asking if people have similar token experiences, but some other people experience it completely different. Wouldn't that mean something is wrong with them, like with Hawaiian pizza? If I were to say I like it, I am experiencing a different token. People would make fun of me. Um, well, we're not here's this is the tricky part, right? Um, this theory doesn't really do justice to phenomenology, right? So, we're about to get to discuss this problem with functionalism and type identity theory. But yeah, like, um, if if I yeah, like if I dislike Hawaiian pizza and you do, do we have the tokens of the same type of mental state, or do we have tokens of different mental states, like enjoyment versus disgust? Um, that's one question, but really, functionalism and type identity theory has trouble capturing the qualia, the phenomenology, the what it's like, right? I hope that answers your question. It's not really like it, or like what you say about about pain at the end. Um, how someone's experience of pain might be different from another's. I mean, yeah, that's true. We can allow for that, but there's still different individual instances of the same type of mental state. Um, but we're clear on the difference, right? Type identity theory would be saying that when we have a mental state, any just consider any mental state. If I have that mental state, you have the same type of mental state because you have the same type of brain state. But our brains are not all exactly the same. So you might have a token of a type of a mental state because you have a token of a type of brain state, and I have a different one. But the problem here is that functionalism, as I mentioned a moment ago, doesn't really capture the raw feels. One consequence that's mentioned, and this is what I really, really want to get to because we do have to finish these slides and get to personal identity. But one interesting consequence of machine functionalism um, is that because um, because of multiple realizability, we might say that machines can think. So, as I mentioned earlier, and as I mentioned at the bottom of the slide, Hillary Putnam developed something called, oh, excuse me, uh, machine functionalism by drawing upon the ideas of Alan Turing. And Alan Turing is the early computer scientist who formalized the notion of computation as rule-governed information processing. And Putnam took that and applied it to the human mind and said that, well, perhaps the human being is a bit like a Turing machine. And we have mental states that map onto physical or functional states in the brain, the same way that the logical states of a Turing machine correspond to its physical states. Yeah, like the movie. And the imitation game was also what he originally called the Turing test, which is his operationalized test of machine intelligence. Incidentally, the machine that we see Turing build in that movie is called the bomb, Bombe. It's not uh, it's not a Turing machine in the strict sense because the Turing machine was an imaginary machine. The Turing machine is like something that he used for doing like logic um, in order to prove that there is no solution to the halting problem for something called the halting problem. So don't worry about any of that. That's all quite um, that's a whole other topic on its own. I disagree. I think that the Turing test actually, I think that the one good thing it might be useful for is telling us about something about human beings, namely how human beings evaluate artificial cognitive systems like sophisticated programs, computer programs, sophisticated chatbots, humanoid robots, etc. I actually wrote my PhD thesis on that. Um, So yeah, Turing formalizes the notion of computation, and he does so with the notion of the Turing machine. And Putnam applies this to the mind, the human mind. So on machine functionalism, it's not inaccurate to say that we are, in a sense, computers. Um, and of course, there's no problem if you're a machine functionalist saying that machines can think. Because thinking just is computation. Thinking just is taking some inputs, um, applying an algorithm, transforming them in some way into some outputs. That's all there is to it. That's thinking, if you're a machine functionalist. Um, well, uh, I mean, the problem with trying to make, I mean, Rachel, that's a good observation. The problem with trying to make this distinction is that, and this is a problem that Turing, I think, didn't, this is why he came up with the Turing test, was that we don't agree on what thinking is. So how do we distinguish it from understanding? We don't agree what thinking is. That's a problem we have. Um, Yeah, in the movie, and this really happened. Alan Turing was part of Project Ultra, where he led a team of cryptographers in at Hut 8 at Bletchley Park in the United Kingdom, um, where their task was to try and decrypt messages sent by the Nazis via their Enigma machines, right? And these machines could encrypt things in like one out of like 150 million possible ciphers. So in order to work out like the when the Nazis and the Soviets invaded Poland and the Polish government, members of the Polish military, Polish scientists escaped to the United Kingdom, and they brought with them Enigma machines that they had captured from the Nazis. And so we kind of knew how they worked, but we needed a system for working out their settings in order to understand the messages that the Nazis were sending to one another to communicate during the war. And that's what Turing built the bomb for. The bomb computer was able to really quickly work out how the Enigma machines were configured. And it's estimated that Turing's work, the intelligence gathered because of his efforts, um, might have shortened the war by about 2 years. and saved about 14 million lives. So, important stuff. Okay, so can a computer think? Alan Turing, again, developed the imitation game, and I'm quite surprised that Crumley doesn't really talk about this. But the imitation game, or the Turing test as it's known now, has us imagine that we're conversing with somebody in a sort of living voice style, viva voce in Latin. It's the kind of thing you do if you undergo like a thesis defense. If you guys, get all the way to your fourth year, and maybe some of you will go to graduate school. You'll probably write a thesis, which is like a really, 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 really long essay. And then you will have to defend it in front of a committee of experts. And they'll ask you questions about it to make sure that you really know what you're talking about. That's the kind of thing Turing had in mind. Except for Turing, we couldn't see or hear who or what we are communicating with. Yeah, not excited. Not excited for the thesis. Well, it's hard, but it's incredibly fulfilling. So, um, my dissertation, getting it done was brutal. Um, Having finished it was amazing. Um, because you walk into the room after you're finished, they kick you out, right? Like you say your thing, people ask you questions, they kick you out and talk about it, decide whether you passed, and then they let you in. And when you come back in, everybody stands up and says, "Congratulations, doctor." So it's actually pretty cool. Um, but anyway, um, so the Turing test, how does that work? Well, like unlike a defense, when I'm standing or sitting, as the case may be, in front of a number of people and they're asking me questions, instead I'm asking questions via typewritten messages on a computer screen, but I don't know who I'm conversing with. Could be a human, could be a computer. So I have a conversation. I can ask it all kinds of questions. And if whatever it is I'm talking to, human or computer, if I'm able to hold a conversation with it and I cannot tell if it's a human or a machine, then we have to say whatever I'm talking to is thinking. So Turing operationalized intelligence. He did it by, when we operationalize something, what we do is we take something that we can't observe, like thinking, and we try and measure it by measuring something that we can observe that we all agree is associated with the thing we can't observe. Verbal communication in this case. So this is very Cartesian. It actually sounds a lot like something Descartes says in the discourses on the method about how humans can use reason and language universally, but machines never could. So a machine could never have a conversation with you. But Turing says, well, if a machine could have a conversation with you, you would have to grant that whatever it is, it's doing, it's thinking. We can call it thinking. And that's all very consistent with functionalism. But then along comes John Searle with his Chinese room thought experiment to try to show that whatever computers are doing, there's no thinking or understanding. Here's maybe how we can kind of tease out the difference that was mentioned in the chat earlier between thinking and understanding. So imagine you're in a scenario that's somewhat like a Turing test. You're in a room. Let's pretend that you're the person in the room. So you're sitting in a room and you don't know any other languages besides English. So you don't speak or read or write any other languages, only English. But there are sheets of paper being passed into the room, and they have Chinese characters written on them. The people outside of the room who are passing those sheets of paper in there, they're all fluent native speakers of, say, Mandarin Chinese. Um, so they write down little messages like, hello, how are you, in Chinese, and they put them inside the room through a little slot. And you're in the room and you're like, well, I don't understand what these characters mean, but I have a rule book and it allows me to select an appropriate response to those inputs. So you receive a message, you don't know what it says. You look up those symbols in the book, and there might be a rule like, if this set of symbols, then respond with this set of symbols. So you compose a message with those symbols. You don't know what they mean, but you pass your message outside of the room. And to the people outside of the room, it looks like whoever's in there understands Chinese. But the thing is, the person in the room does not understand Chinese, not at all, even though it's following the program. So the person in the room is meant to be like the computer running the program. And the computer doesn't understand any of the symbols that it's transforming from inputs to outputs. You're just manipulating inputs according to rules or algorithms. So Searle argues that the person in the room, even though they seem to be successfully communicating with the people outside of the room, the person in the room doesn't understand Chinese at all. There's no understanding. And Searle thinks that computers are like this too. Computers manipulate symbols like zeros and ones according to rules, but they have no understanding of what they're doing. They just manipulate inputs and outputs. That's it. Computers don't know anything. Computers don't think. Computers don't understand. It's just not the kind of thing computers can do. So there can be, if you're a computer, um, what we call syntactic symbol manipulation, um, operating on the symbols, but there's no semantics. There's no meaning. The computers are blind to the meaning of those symbols. It's we, the computer programmers, who assign the meaning and who understand what the symbols mean. Searle would say that the semantics, the meaning is parasitic to the syntax, not intrinsic to it. And Searle doesn't think that we are like that. We're different. We're not computers, he would say. Um, so if Searle is right, then this is a very powerful objection against the Turing test because the person in the room is doing what a computer does, but she doesn't understand anything. So she could be appearing to have a conversation with the people outside of the room who are saying in Mandarin, like, hello, how are you? Oh, it says, I'm fine, how are you? And then, write down some more characters. I'm well. What are you doing in that room? Right? And they could have a whole conversation in that style that Turing imagines you having a conversation, with a computer. And it would seem like there's understanding. It would seem like you're talking to someone with an understanding of the language they're using, even though there is no understanding. And that's why it's an argument against the Turing test. Well, some might say that, right? Some would say, like, well, you know, um, they might say maybe if we, there's actually a couple of replies to this. One is the systems reply, which says that, okay, maybe the person in the room doesn't understand Chinese, but we could say that the room, the person in it, the rule book, the whole system does understand Chinese. That's the system's reply. Or there's the robot reply, which says that, well, really, like what we are all like is we all have an internalized rule book and we all exist. So if we're a native English speaker, we all have our internalized rule books of English and we exist in a body, in a world with other embodied speakers of English. We don't exist in rooms with messages being passed out in and out in languages that we don't understand. No, we exist in a world with other speakers. Um, so, okay, so the essay assignment, I'm getting a lot of questions all of a sudden because it's due today. I just want to remind everybody, like, I gave the instructions on this assignment 6 weeks ago. Um, there's a lecture. There's a lecture which contains the instructions. Um, yeah, it's due Friday. That's the 22nd. Yeah, that's this Friday. Oh no, not due today. Did I say it's due today? No, it's due Friday. Um, but people, I mean, just for like people emailing the week it's due to ask me, sorry, I'm venting a little, but like it's due this week. Um, so I gave the instructions 6 weeks ago. That's it. That's all I'm saying about that. Okay, yeah, if I said it was due today, I misspoke. No, it's not due today. It's due Friday. I'm glad you find it helpful, Rachel. That's why I gave the lecture so early because I knew I couldn't have the whole class emailing me the week of going, what do I do, right? So I gave the instructions early for a reason. So where were we? All right, Cormac's question. Well, oh, I see. Okay, so remember, computers are symbolic information processors, right? So computers have physical states, which we call symbols. Like in a computer like this one, it's zeros and ones are the symbols, and the physical states are circuits that are open or closed or on or off, right? Um, it's it's um, it's thought by machine functionalists that we're like this too. We have symbols, and really, it's hard to do justice to this in such a short amount of space because Crumley just does not talk about what a Turing machine is, and I think that's something he probably should have done. But a Turing machine also uses symbols, and the idea is that maybe we have symbols, like in a sort of language of thought. Maybe our symbols that represent information are different configurations of neurons firing in different patterns or something, right? Those are the symbols that Searle is talking about. Not strictly speaking language, but the symbols that represent information in the computer that is the mind. Yeah, thank you, Karen. So Well, Searle doesn't think it's a matter of time. He just doesn't think it's the kind of thing a computer can do. But if you're sympathetic to the robot reply, then yeah, maybe it's not just time that you need, but you need to be in a world. You need to be in a world with other thinking embodied creatures who use words consistently to refer to the same sorts of things. Um, the main takeaway is just that I'll try to give this summary as succinctly as possible. Alan Turing thinks that whatever we're talking about, computer or human, if you can hold a conversation with it, then you've got to agree that it can think. It can think. Searle would say that's not necessarily the case because of the Chinese room. We can imagine a scenario where there's a conversation like sort of thing happening with no understanding, with no thinking. Because the person in the room is blind to the meaning of the symbols. Um, so even if the person in the room appeared to be successfully conversing with the people outside of the room, Searle would say, we can't call that thinking. We can't call what computers do thinking. Yeah, that's an analogy, April, that some people make. Like the brain is the hardware and the mind is the software. But yeah, like essentially um the the way the neurons are firing would constitute your symbols. Your symbols are always physical patterns. And I like our textbook, but it does not do this topic justice. I could spend a whole class on this. Yeah, kind of, Cormac. Like he's saying that um well, Putnam is more concerned with the mind, not the brain. He's saying that the mind is computational and the brain states that are functionally equivalent to the mental states that he's concerned with, they're similar to the physical states of a Turing machine or of a computer. I think this chapter would go a lot better if Crumley had explained Turing machines, which he doesn't. But let's not worry too much about it. You just need to know that for Turing and Putnam, what machines do is thinking, and for Searle, what machines do, i.e., rule governed information processing, is not thinking. As I said earlier, functionalism doesn't really explain qualia. And this is illustrated by Ned Block's China brain experiment. Why China? I guess because there's a lot of people. So imagine if we gave everybody in China um, a means of connecting with one another so that they're all like neurons in a big brain. And imagine the brain is connected to a giant body. We could have the entire population of China communicating with one another like neurons communicate with one another, and we could organize the population functionally like a brain. But if the giant body stubbed its toe, who feels pain? All of the people in the China brain? Do they all feel pain, or how does that work, right? Um, and this is meant to show that functionalism, because the entire population of China is supposed to be functionally organized like a brain. This is meant to show that functionalism doesn't explain qualia or subjectivity or the raw feels. Yeah, thank you, Cormac. I'll also recommend okay, I'll also recommend other videos on my YouTube channel. I have a class called Minds and Machines where I spend a lot of time talking about this. So if you want to get an understanding from a philosophical perspective, I encourage you to check those out. And like Cormac says, you can check out a ComSci perspective here. Remy says, since representations stand for other things, the idea here seems to be that symbolic representations must instantiate external factors of the real world. Um, so the symbolic representations merely represent. I'm not sure what you mean by factors. Um, but yeah, it sounds like you're talking about multiple realizability, like, or at least the idea that there are intelligent organisms that organize representations in a different manner is not a problem for functionalism because of multiple realizability. Um, but we're really getting bogged down in details that I don't think we should get bogged down into because we're really falling behind here. Um, but consider also the inverted spectrum argument. You know, how can functionalism account for differences in subjective experience, right? Imagine I have a typical spectrum, but you have an inverted spectrum such that my green is your red and vice versa. We could talk about red objects and green objects unproblematically, even though we each have different inner experiences of those colors. And then we'd have no idea that we have different inner experiences of those colors. And functionalism doesn't seem ready to explain that or able to explain that. Yeah. Well, we're going to try really go through them quickly. If you really want to get eliminative, you can be an eliminative materialist. So, if you're an eliminative materialist, you probably deny that mental states, or at least folk notions of mental states, exist. So, things like beliefs and desires, you would say, are not scientifically useful. Um, our folk psychology is not scientifically accurate, right? I'm just going to top up my coffee for the next few slides. So our folk psychology or our common sense psychology is kind of the way we use that's the way we use beliefs and desires to explain and predict behavior, right? And Crumley gives lots of examples of this in the book, right? I might believe that, let's say I'm hungry, so I form the desire to eat. Okay, so I have a desire. And I believe that I still have some leftover shepherd's pie in the fridge that I made the other day. And so those beliefs and desires can interact and cause me to get up and heat up a slice of shepherd's pie and eat it so that I'm no longer hungry, right? That's a way of understanding my behavior and my mental states. But I could also understand other people's mental states using folk psychology, right? Let's say my partner is leaving the apartment and I see her leaving and she's got her umbrella. Well, why does she have her umbrella? She must believe that it's going to rain later and she desires to stay dry. Thus, she's bringing her umbrella with her. So that's folk psychology. Now, eliminative materialism says, well, that's might seem like what's going on, uh, but it's not a good scientific theory, right? So maybe we should leave folk psychological terms behind. Maybe we should leave other mentalistic terms behind. We've done this before. Scientists used to appeal to elan vital, a vital force, to explain life. We no longer need to because we understand metabolism and DNA and stuff. There used to be something scientists talked about called the luminiferous ether, which they used to explain how light or gravity propagated through space. They thought there needed to be a medium for these things to propagate through. But after Albert Einstein came along and formulated his theory of relativity, well, we don't need this anymore. We understand space-time itself is something is like almost like a medium through which, for example, gravity can travel. Or not travel, but gravity is the bending of space-time, right? It doesn't flow like water. Or phlogiston. We used to use phlogiston to explain how heat flows from one object to another. We used to use calories to measure this heat energy. Now we just use calories to talk about how much energy is in our food, right? But we used to use it for something else. Um, Now, eliminative materialists think that one day terms like belief, desire will go the way of phlogiston and elan vital and the ether, etc. So, um, mental states like beliefs are perhaps useful in our everyday life for making sense of certain behaviors, but scientifically speaking, we should get rid of them. And we should just talk about brain states, not mental states. Forget about those silly mental states. Beliefs and desires are like phlogiston or something. We don't need these concepts. Get rid of them. Just talk about what's going on in the brain. And so notable eliminative materialists include the Churchlands, for example, Paul and Patricia Churchland. Then, of course, there's behaviorism, another type of eliminativism. And if you've taken a psychology class, you've certainly heard of behaviorism. Behaviorism um, um, is all about conditioning. It's all about the linking together of stimulus and response. We don't need mental states. There's a couple kinds of behaviorism. One is reductive. This is kind of like the philosophical version of behaviorism. So it's sometimes known as logical or analytical behaviorism. And it says the causes of our behavior are stimuli in the environment. Whenever we employ mentalistic descriptions, we're actually talking about behavioral dispositions. So what we're doing is reducing the mental to the behavioral. So what is it to be in pain? Um, to be in pain is to go, ouch, um, when you stub your toe, right? That's it. Um, and then there's eliminative behaviorism or ontological behaviorism, which rejects the existence of the mental. So reductive behaviorism reduces mentalistic talk to behavioristic talk. And eliminative behaviorism says, let's get rid of the mental altogether. And it was championed by, Watson and Skinner and those behaviorists, those early behaviorist psychologists. Oh boy, excuse me. Ah, that was a big yawn. So one thing the behaviorists have in common with the eliminative materialists is that mental talk, they think, is not explanatory. It doesn't do anything for us. But behaviorism has actually faced some pretty serious challenges. Um, it was replaced by cognitive psychology. Um, the downfall of behaviorism actually started from within with Edward Tolman's rat studies. So if you're taking, I don't remember what the course is called now. I used to teach it back when it was called Intro to Cognitive Science. But if you're taking Cognitive Science 2001B, you'll probably learn about Tolman's rat studies and how they learn to run mazes without being rewarded. Um, so that comes from behaviorism. It was thought that these rats are learning these mazes because they get a reward. So stimulus, it's the stimulus and response thing. It's conditioning. But Tolman found that some of his rats who were not being rewarded were actually learning the layouts of mazes, and they did better at running the mazes once they started getting a reward, because they already had learned the layout of the maze. So and how are they doing that? Well, mental representations, which, according to behaviorism, we're supposed to eliminate. So it actually started from within. You also had Noam Chomsky's review of Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior, which kind of kicked off a lot of Chomsky's ideas. Universal grammar, so on. Oh, good, Isaiah. That's perfect. So I don't have to. Well, if you want to hop on the Discord and tell us about it, I mean, I could go on. I used to teach that class, but we're getting so behind that I don't want to spend too much time on it. But in philosophy, at least, one of the reasons why behaviorism failed, a logical behaviorism, is because you just cannot get away from mental talk. You can't. No matter how hard you try, you cannot get away from employing mentalistic terminology. And also, behaviorism can't really explain novel behavior. Behaviorism might be able to explain why you withdraw, uh, I don't know, you withdraw from a painful stimulus out of habit. Like, let's say when you were a little kid, you burned your hand on the stove. Well, now you're going to be very, very careful whenever you're around that stove because of that initial experience. You kind of conditioned yourself. Or the classic example of conditioning is Pavlov's dogs, right? Ivan Pavlov. Um, he would feed his dogs in his laboratory, and there was a bell on the door in the kennel where he kept the dogs. I didn't go in there, open the door, bring the dog food, feed all the dogs, and the bell would ring. The dogs would see the food and salivate, right? One day, Pavlov noticed that even if he went in and the bell rang, the dogs would salivate even if there was no food. They had conditioned the dogs um, to respond to the bell, to this new stimulus, because they had associated it with what we call an unconditioned stimulus, that is food, which caused them to salivate. And that's classical conditioning. Um, but how do we explain novel behavior? I mean, behaviorism, conditioning, and all of that. It explains things like, how we train our pets, but it does not explain novel behavior. That's another problem. Well, we've got about 15 minutes left, so we should try and get to personal identity and the self. Have you ever thought about what makes a person a person? I mean, like, what makes you the person you are, and what makes me the person I am? What makes us who we are and not someone else? What do you think? You might answer that it's your soul or your mind or perhaps the body you inhabit. Maybe it's your DNA. Maybe your individual memories that you have from your life, over your life experience. These are all perfectly reasonable answers, by the way. You might also ask yourself, in what sense are you the same or different from the person you were yesterday or 10 years ago? You're obviously the same person, but you're also probably different than you were a decade ago. What is it that makes you the same person? And could you change in other ways and still be the same person that you are now? These are the sort of questions we ask when we talk about personal identity and the self, which is the subject of this chapter. Excuse me, I'm sorry, that was gross. But I'm stuffy this morning. Oh, bleh. I don't think it's allergies, but I don't know. Maybe it's just that time of year. It's cold and flu season. Okay, let's do a little thought experiment. The ship of Theseus. It's a really old thought experiment. So Theseus is a sort of legendary sailor, founder of the city of Athens, and he's got a ship. Maybe it's a trireme like this one. This is actually a modern recreation um, of an ancient Greek sailing ship called a trireme. So this is a ship that actually exists in the Greek Navy. Now, the people of Athens want to preserve Theseus's ship because he's a legendary figure, etc., etc. So they turn his ship into a museum ship. They keep it in the harbor, and people can come and check it out. But um, after a while, the parts start to wear out. After a while, we start to have to replace parts of the ship. And after a very, very long time, all of the parts have been replaced. There are no original parts left. Is it still the same ship? Is it still the ship of Theseus? What do you say? Continuity of perceived existence. So, Remy, would you say it is the same? So Remy says, yeah, it's the same ship, but Noamine says no. Rachel would say yes, for simplicity's sake. So there's some disagreement, right? Quinn would say it's not the same. Fair. Kara says yes and no. Yeah, it is complicated. So some of you say yes and some of you say no. Kaya says all our cells turn over with time, but yeah, we still have the same genetic code. So we're like the ship, right? I'm not made up of all the same matter I was a decade ago, but I'm the same person. So maybe the ship is still the same ship, even though it's not made of the same matter. Here's a tricky thing. What if you said that it is the same ship, then what if we take all the old parts and put them back together? Now which one's the ship of Theseus? You might still say Cooper. You might still say that's not the ship because it was taken apart. It's just parts and you've just thrown it together. You might deny that is the ship, or you might say, "Oh yeah, that's the original ship," or you might say maybe there are two ships. It's tricky to think about, right? Yeah, maybe it's like a clone, right? Like maybe what I've done is just cloned the ship from its old parts. What this thought experiment is trying to do is illuminate ways we can understand identity. So, what are some of the ways we can understand identity? Well, qualitative identity. Maybe X and Y are identical in the sense that they have the same qualities. So, think about like two models of the same car, right? They have the same qualities. So even though they're two different individuals, they are identical because they're the exact same, made to the exact same specifications. They're pretty much the same. I think Crumley uses the example of two newly minted coins, right? They're two different coins, but they're fresh off the mint, made of the exact same stuff. There are no individuating marks on the coins yet because they haven't been in circulation. So they're identical to one another in the sense that they have the same qualities. Of course, we can also talk about numerical identity, where X just is Y. They're the same individual. So X and Y are the same entity. So Batman and Bruce Wayne are the same individual. They're Batman and Bruce Wayne are numerically identical to one another. Okay, so in the chat, Gray says, uh, let's see where there are heart transplants or any organ transplants wouldn't be like taking the parts of the ship and putting it somewhere else. It doesn't mean that the person now becomes the person that they got their heart from. Yeah, no, well, Grace, you're right. Like if I yeah, let's say I have an organ transplant, and I wake up, I still feel like me, you know. Sure, something's changed, um, but I'm still me, right? So does that mean that who I am fundamentally is not so much about my physical body, but maybe about my mind, right? So, don't worry, don't worry. We're gonna get there. Um, yeah, Freaky Friday. Um, Yeah, we're no, I mean, I'm glad you brought that up because we will talk about that movie actually. But yeah, Freaky Friday, like or any body swap kind of adventure. They can be very funny, because think about it. If you've switched places with somebody, it's like, well, hilarity ensues, of course. But it also raises interesting questions about identity. Yeah. Well, Kaya and Sully, we'll be talking about those coming up. We probably won't have time to get to it today, um but yeah, I mean, you can imagine some kind of mad scientist scenario where okay, the chat's blowing up. But you can imagine some kind of scenario where a mad scientist puts my brain in your body and your brain in mine, and then we wake up and we're like I'm Josh, but I'm in a different body. Or maybe you would be a whole new entity, right? Um, well, Paul, that's a good question. Yeah, I think I'm glad that there are so many questions, but we'll get there. Um, for now, I'm going to just try and finish off this slide. So we've covered qualitative identity and numerical identity. Then there's individual identity. That is whatever constitutes the important nature of me. So like kind of related to Paul's question, what is it that constitutes the important nature of me as an individual? Is it my brain, my memories, my DNA, right? It could be any number of those. Any one of those. And then there's personhood identity. That's what makes a person a person. Now, all of these can interact and intersect with one another. I don't think we need to explore this too much because I think you've already kind of started to do that in the chat, right? We can see how these things kind of, we can see how it's complicated. Am I right? But certainly one way to characterize persons is through their mental life. We all have mental lives. So what makes a person a person? We have consciousness, we have memories, we have beliefs, desires, emotions, goals, we have concerns, right? Um, and that's what makes a person, right? Why do I have rights such that I should be free from unnecessary suffering? Well, because I can suffer, and suffering doesn't feel good. I'm sentient. So maybe that's what makes me a person. Of course, another way to characterize persons is in terms of bodies. So I know that John is John and Sarah is Sarah because, well, that's John's body and that's Sarah's body. I mean, that's fairly straightforward until you get to the Freaky Friday scenarios, right? What if John and Sarah have their brains switched or their mind switched, right? Then we have to have the Freaky Friday conversation like, it's me. It's actually me. I look like someone else, but it's me, right? And then there's like kind of like the Aristotelian views, the hylomorphic views, the views that say that persons are really a combination of matter plus some organizing principle, like a form. We'll look at those theories next time. Don't worry too much about them for today. Um, I don't know, Split. Tell me about Split. What is that? Is that the one uh M. Night Shyamalan where it's split personality or something? Yeah. Um, so it's complicated. I mean, we've got 3 minutes left. We don't agree. We don't know, right, how to characterize cases of dissociative identity disorder. That movie is probably not a good depiction of the disorder. Yeah. Yeah, it's not a good depiction. When it comes to multiple personalities, are we talking about multiple selves in the same head? Or are we talking about a fragmented self, one self that's sort of come apart into different pieces or aspects? This disorder, dissociative identity disorder, is so rare that we really don't know. So, um, I can't answer your question, but I can recommend. I know that Jennifer Radin has written a lot about selves and identities and multiple personalities. I would check that out. I would check her work out. That's Jennifer Radin, if you're interested in this. I'm not able to do justice to it in the time that we have left today. Quiz grades, I don't know. Aiming for the usual 2 week turnaround time, but it's a very busy time of year, so we're gonna do the best we can. Well, we should probably leave it there. So, thanks everybody. I hope you enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Like I said, the TAs and I will be working on the quizzes, trying to get those back to you as soon as we can. And yeah, don't forget to submit your essays and proof of student work. Give me a couple rough drafts along with your final draft. Um, okay, that's it. I'll see you all on Thursday. We'll talk more about persons and selves. Bye, everyone. Yeah, 2 to 3 drafts. Just enough to show me that you did the work. I unfortunately I have to go. I have to run up to campus. I would send an email to me. Okay, Mahmoud, just send me an email and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. But I really do have to run. I would stay and chat, but I've got to get up there and I've got to take the bus. Um, okay, so send me an email. Really, if you're asking me about any coursework, it should be an email. Yeah, just send me an email and I'll get back to you. Okay, bye for now, everyone.